had a wonderful session, and today will be no different. I anticipate an engaging session with you all today. But before we go into the presentation, I'll ask you to pause and allow me to pray and invite the Lord's presence in this space. Father, we thank you for a wonderful session yesterday, and we anticipate another engaging session today, but we know that you make all things possible. So we ask you to help us to have great connectivity, that all our speakers will have great connectivity, and that the discussions will redound to your honor and your glory is my asking in your name. Amen. Amen. Okay, so if you know how we do our presentations, you know I'm going to hand over to Tiona Delis Mears, General Project Officer at the CROSQ Secretariat, to do our housekeeping. Tiona, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. So we have a few housekeeping rules that I'm just going to go over with you for those who are new with us today and didn't get a chance to join us yesterday. So first, we're asking you to keep your microphones muted during the presentations. We're asking that you please change your participant name to your name and your organization. So you would see my name would be Tiana Delise Mears CROSQ. You can abbreviate your organization name, or if you have a shorter name, feel free to include the entire name. And we're letting you know the session is being recorded, so please be mindful when you're allowed to open your mic and engage with us. Any questions you may have, we're advising you to place them into the chat, and our moderator, Dr. Walker, she will read out the question, or someone from our team will notify her. As well as if you would like to speak, instead of putting your question in chat, you can raise your virtual hand, and this can be done by going to reactions, and there would be a raise hand option. Someone from our team will see your hand and you will be given the floor to speak. So just wait on that. And our last housekeeping rule, just to notify you that we have French and Dutch interpretation. So if you go down to your toolbar, you will see both a French and Dutch interpretation option. So you can click the language that is appropriate to you. And that concludes our housekeeping. So over to you, Dr. Walker. Thank you.
Thank you. Somehow I think I'm hearing someone else speaking in the background, and I'm going to ask either the host to mute that person or the person to mute themselves. Thank you so much. Yesterday, we explored the policy context, emerging regulatory developments, and the strategic importance of the digital product passport within the evolving global trade environment. We had two distinguished presenters, as you will see on your screen in the agenda. Today's discussions move us further along the preparedness journey. As CARICOM advances its digital transformation agenda, we must also ensure that our standard systems, quality infrastructure institutions, regulatory frameworks, and business communities are prepared to operate effectively in increasingly data-driven market spaces. The DPP, Digital Product Passport, is about far more than technological compliance. We saw yesterday that it represents a shift. It represents a shift toward greater product transparency, traceability, sustainability, and accountability throughout global value chains. Today, we have an opportunity to hear more about how the DPP will achieve those lofty expectations. For CARICOM, this presents both opportunities and challenges. The opportunity lies in leveraging digital systems and quality infrastructure to enhance market confidence, something we do very well at CROSQ, facilitate trade, and strengthen the competitiveness of Caribbean products and services. The challenge, however, lies in ensuring that our businesses, our MSMEs, have the knowledge, skills, tools, and support needed to adapt successfully and prepare. We heard yesterday that the acts will be gazetted and will be implemented in 2027, but we have a 18-month transition period. And so we know that we will have some time to ensure that we get all our systems in place. Today's sessions will bridge the gap that in helping us identify the sustainability requirements and how we will react in the CARICOM community with respect to standardization, etc. And we will be providing some practical guidance, highlighting available resources, and exploring actions that various stakeholders can take to strengthen regional preparedness. I encourage you all, in fact, I urge you to think beyond just compliance. I urge you to ask questions. I urge you to engage now when we have the opportunity to make sure that we take the right path that will lead us to the successful conclusion we all desire. So I'd like to thank our presenters, and I will be introducing them shortly while we do, just before they do their presentation. And I wish you all our stakeholders a very productive day too. I would like you to help me welcome our first presenter. She is Margalu Galou, Senior Program Manager, Environmental Coalition on Standards, ECOS. She will be speaking to us on the DPP objectives and sustainability. Yesterday, you did very well in showing love and appreciation. So I want you to show Margot some love as she comes to the podium. Welcome, Margot, and thank you for agreeing to present to us this morning. Well, afternoon for you.
Thank you very much for the warm welcomes. So I'm very glad to have been invited to speak in this event, and I will start my presentation right away. So let me share my screen. And first of all, I'm gonna start with giving you a little bit of an introduction of where I come from and why I'm speaking today. I hope you can see everything well. So as said in the title, my focus today is to explain to you what was the rationale behind introducing the digital product passport in Europe, and especially from the environmental perspective. So I come from ECOS, which is the Environmental Coalition on Standards. We are an international NGO, so we're representing civil society, and we work mostly in standardization, but also in European policy. And our goal is to bring the environmental voice in the discussion where technical requirements are being developed. So especially on issues like, we cover a broad range of issues, but it could be recycled content, it could be life cycle assessment, it could be how do you make low carbon cement, how do you make sustainable textiles, like really all sorts of environmental topics that are regulated in the EU, but for which also international standards are being drafted. So where are we? We are primarily in Brussels, which is where we originated. So we're closely linked to the European policy. Also give us the expertise to present today, but we are working a lot at international level, mostly with ISO. And we recently opened an office in Nairobi in Kenya. And the idea is that we're also working with other regions than Europe when it comes to standardization. We are a member-based organization. We have about 63 members at the moment. They're mostly located in Europe. We also have a few international members and some members outside of Europe, mainly in Africa. And so the way we work basically is that we really add this intersection between global commitments, legal and policy legislation, and technical voluntary standards. So we're really making this link between the big objectives, the big regulation tells you what to do and what not to do, and how do you actually translate that concretely for companies? What does it mean to be more sustainable? And the reason we work this way is because in Europe, we have this a bit specific system where legislation is set by the legislator, as in every other places, and really defines what you should be doing, but it doesn't really tell you how. And then the European Commission mandates European standardization bodies to develop technical standards to prove conformity towards the law. And that's why we're very involved there, is because we know that if we want the law to actually be implemented properly, you need to have standards that reflect the ambition, the environmental ambition of the laws. So that's why we work a lot on standardization. So that was a little bit of background to also explain that's going to be very important for the DPP, where a lot of things, like the big principles were set in the legislation, but how is this actually going to be implemented is going to come a lot in specific legislation and then in standards. So still a lot of work to do, still a lot of things to define. So now really moving into the topic, the European Union Digital Product Passport. So I'm really going to focus on the European Union one, although there are now a lot of other initiatives. So originally, the first time this was proposed was in the batteries regulation, which provides sustainability requirements for batteries. And that's where the first digital product passport was introduced for information such as carbon footprint. And then that was a bit of a test balloon. And now we really have the bigger legislation that really made it a headline, which is the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation. It's the European regulation that sets requirements for all sorts of products on the market to be more sustainable. Originally, the Eco-Design regulation focused on energy products like home appliances. And now it applies, like the scope has become much wider, and it will look at anything apart from a few exemptions. So it will look at textiles, mattresses, still electronic products. They also intermediary product like steel, maybe iron, why not cement? Like you have all sorts of things that are going to be covered by this legislation. And really here, the idea was that the digital product passport would be the way to share environmental information. In the ESPR, you have two ways of regulating, either performance requirements, so saying your TV must not use more energy than a certain amount for a certain type of performance. So you really tell them you have to be efficient. And you also have complementation, which is information, saying, okay, you can be have all these kind of performances, but you need to inform us about what the performance is, so that also consumers and suppliers can choose the product that they want based on sustainability information. So they can choose the most sustainable products. And these information requirements also inform the legislator when creating new performance requirements. Like they need to know what's the average performance of something, what's possible with existing technology to raise the bar. So really the DPP originated in this idea of sharing environmental information. What we're seeing coming, and which is likely to happen in the coming years, is that the DPP could become the one-stop shop for all mandatory information way beyond the environment. So we're talking conformity information, safety information. There's a lot of interest from the legislator of, if we're going to develop such a big information tool, we should use it for everything else. So it becomes easier for companies to prove their conformity. It's easier for market surveillance authorities to check, for customs, but also for consumers, for researchers, that we have like one place to find all of this mandatory information. But that's not yet in the regulation. The European Product Act is still in preparation. It has not been proposed. It has not been voted at all. So this is a bit like where we're seeing it coming in the next years. I'm putting it here. But for the moment, we're still at the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation stage. So really focus on environmental information. Just to let you know, so I've said these are the main legislation where the DPP is being talked about, but it has mushroomed in a few other legislations. We also have it in the construction product regulation, in the new regulation for the safety of toys, so where they actually want to put safety information in the DPP. We have a few others, detergent regulation, critical raw material act, that mention the DPP. But these are likely to build upon the system that's being set up via the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation. The thing to know, which can be a bit complicated when implementing, is that these laws were done separately. There were efforts to align them, but they have their own timeline. They've been done by their own policymakers, and still the texts are not exactly the same. So I'm really going to stick to the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation, which is the main one, and hopefully European institutions will be able to align so we have really one big system that works for all of them. I'm also mentioning this, my presentation is focused on the European project, but there has been a lot of interest for this ID elsewhere than in Europe, not just as a reaction of the European Union's legislation, but also because DPP existed before and because they've been developed for a few years now. But you have lots of international interest for it, and we're also seeing China really getting into the topic. So it's worth looking also what others are doing, especially at ISO level, because this is a landscape that's going to change a lot in the coming years. There's lots of work in preparation, especially to ensure interoperability between all the digital product passports, because at the moment they exist in the private sector. Some companies use them, but they're not as interoperable than what we'd like to see, which is a system where all data from every company can talk to each other, can be accessed with the right access rights and everything. So it's a much bigger project, much bigger ambition. So why are we doing this? Now that I've explained a little bit of the context, where it's at, who's talking about it, why are we doing this? The main idea is to solve information deficit across the value chain. There's lots of information that's being created, but it gets lost at some point. It's not being provided from one supplier up to the consumer or to the end-of-life operators. So for example, if you are making products yourself, you're a manufacturer, you want to find the best components, you want to have access to the best designs, and it's a bit hard to compare different offers. Well, with the DDV, that makes it easier. Or you are a retailer and you want to propose sustainable products to your customers, but you don't know what to put on your shelves. That can help you as well. You also want to check whether they actually conform to the legislation because you've imported them from outside and you're a bit afraid of enforcement. That can help you as well. And if you're a consumer, what should you buy? What's going to be the most efficient product? Which is the one that has the least impact on the environment? Does it have any durability requirements? Is it going to fail after a few uses? These are information that could be shared on a digital product passport in a harmonized way, so you can reduce a little bit greenwashing, or just having data that is formatted in the same way means that the words mean the same thing, and it becomes easier for consumers to understand what we're talking about. And you could have all this information. Something that could also be very interesting are, for example, information on use, on repair. How do you keep your fridge working for longer, for example? Finally, if you are a repairer, you want to know how to repair something. You want to know how to access spare parts, where to buy them. That could be, the manufacturer could provide that information. If you're a recycler, you want to know where, like what valuable materials are in this object and where are they. You want to know if there is substances of concern, like hazardous chemicals that you need to be aware of. You want to know what are the precautionary measures. All this information exists somewhere, but if you could have like one website where it is and easy to access with a QR code, that would make your work a lot easier, because right now, often in recycling plants, simply workers do not have the time, they do not necessarily have the workstation to go and scan or find, know every single model of fridges that exist on the market. So the idea is to simplify the work of end-of-life providers. So really have a way that you can effectively store information, even if the company goes bankrupt, that the information still exists somewhere, that everybody can look into with different access rights, that is written in a way that they understand whether it's the consumers or it's professional. So it's really like the big idea behind the whole thing. So on this slide and the next couple slides, I'm presenting what the European Commission has proposed. So the big rationale is shared by everyone, but what actually ended up in the legislation? Basically, the ESPRs, so the Eco Design Regulation, is a framework legislation. It sets the big principles. It gives you the scope of what can be done, not necessarily what will be done exactly for every single product, but it tells you the width of everything that we can do. And then this will be designed product by product in specific laws, so what we call delegated acts, that are going to translate this general requirement into specific rules for specific products. So the things they have in mind that have mentioned in the legislation are things like instruction of use, so the user manual, the repair manual for the repairers, this sort of things. Certificates of conformity. So already for the products that would be covered in the eco design regulation, certificates of conformity, the idea is that they move from paper-based to digital, and then they will be stored in the DPP. Carbon footprint, this is likely to be the one environmental information that we're sort of certain will be there, because it's the one for which we have well-established methodologies. There's still some harmonization to do, but basically we more or less know or agree on how to do this. Databases exist, so even if a company is not collecting data on their own specific product, they can estimate where that footprint is. So very likely this is the one environmental information that we expect to stay. Other informations may be harder to get, like for example, whole LCA information may be more complicated. Origin of the materials, so especially linked to issues of due diligence. Currently, there is no link with due diligence legislations, but that's something that it would be very interesting to make the link. We don't know if they will, but typically there are links that can be made in the future. Composition, so that's especially for substances of concern. But you could also have critical raw materials, so things that are interesting for recycling. Manufacturing processes, where has it been made? Has it been made? Also linked to the footprint, obviously. Disposal options. So this is also targeted at consumers. How do you dispose of it? Where do you dispose of it? In Europe, we have different codes for different countries. So if you could have all this information in one place, would be easier. And same thing with reuse option. So information from the manufacturers on how to deal with a product once you no longer want it. This is the translation, like the exact words that have been mentioned in the legislation, so really in the text. They can, as I've said, like the law gives you the framework for the information requirements, like everything that can be included. It may not be included, but it can be included. So product durability, reusability, upgradability, repairability, presence of substances that inhibit circularity. So it's not just dangerous substances, but also those that you don't want, that can make recycling difficult, or that you don't want to keep in the value chains. Like you want to get rid of them, so you don't want them to stay just because you've used recycled materials. Energy and resource efficiency. As I've said, the original Eco Design Directive was very much about energy efficiency. Now we're moving towards resource efficiency as well. Recycled content. We're expecting targets on this in certain sectors. Remanufacturing and recycling. So as I said, information on the end of life. And finally, carbon and environmental footprint. My guess is that carbon is likely to make the cut. Environmental, in some cases, yes. In others, maybe not, or adapted, not the full environmental footprint. We'll have to see. Here's the thing. You will always have information requirements. The goal is to always have them in the digital product passport, but they will decide on a case by case whether they actually create a passport for that product category. So still a lot of questions. And that leads me to this slide. Basically, you have what's written in the law, and you have what everybody is hoping. And a lot of people are hoping a lot of different things. And they think that it may be inside, but they don't know. So at some point, we just gathered all the things we're hearing, and we're like, is this actually written in the law, or is this still something that needs to be done later? And what we've noticed that there's a lot of things that still need to be decided, especially in the product-specific regulations. So there's still a lot coming. And there, really what we'd like to see is really ambitious performance requirements. So the law really pushing companies to improve their products, not just reproduce common practices, because then there's no point regulating. Ensuring that there is easy access to the necessary information, prevent the argument that companies should not, that you need business confidentiality, and basically reduce the access to information when the whole point of the DPP is to increase access to information. Another thing that's important is that there's information that still needs to be on the packaging for consumers to have it at the point of sale. You should really not mix marketing information such as green claims with mandatory information, because consumers not going to make the difference, so they should not be mixed. And finally, that information really should be reliable, it should be accessible, and you should not let product enter the market if the manufacturer has not provided that information. So really, that's what we're hoping for. That's what we're going to be arguing for as well, because we're involved in this legislative process. Voilà, that will finish my presentation on this. I do not have the time on my screen, so I hope I am within. And normally we have a little time for exchange.
If you have additional slides, Margot, please go ahead. Or this is
I'm
the
at
end.
the end.
Oh, okay. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentation. Please show Margot some love. You know, when I heard her the first time I heard her present when we were in Brussels, I was just so excited. She's such a great presenter. So I know that the presentation is clear, and I know that you may have questions and comments. So even as you're sending up those reactions, I want you to indicate if you have something that you would like Margot to clarify for you, or if you have a burning issue that you want to address this morning. The floor is yours. Yes, I
And
know
I'm
she was
just
there.
saying a comment saying that I was speaking a bit fast for translator. So if anything wasn't clear, A, I'm sorry. B, ask your question. I'm very happy to repeat if it was too fast.
I see a question in the chat. What are concrete preparations at the Commission for the upcoming European Product Act? Would you
Yes, so
address that?
unfortunately, I'm not the person following this specific act in ECOS, so I will not have the most updated information. But my understanding is that the proposal has not been proposed yet, and so the Commission is probably still in the preparation of it. But I think the public consultation is finished, so we're probably in the later stage of actually putting together a proposal. But I can't tell you much more than this.
Okay. And what we can do too at CROSQ is see if we can get some additional information, and we will share it at some point with our stakeholders. Okay, let me see. I see there's another question in the chat. Who is responsible to ensure the information uploaded is accurate?
So the person responsible is the economic operator who has the responsibility for creating the DPP. So that can be the manufacturer, if the manufacturer is the company putting it on the market. It could be the importer, could be the retailer. So you have to clarify who's responsible for creating the DPP, and then that person is responsible for the accuracy.
Okay.
Then whether that information will be verified is one of the question mark, and how it will be verified.
Thank you so much, Margot. I see another question. Will any input or mechanisms be required of the ports of loading and departure?
For loading and departure, I have not heard about this. What I heard of is that for arrival in Europe for imports, the idea is that the DPP, there will be a link between the DPP system and the customs system. So for the DPP registry, so it will be possible to automatically check whether there is a DPP. They will not look into the data, but they will be able to automatically check that the conformity information exists and has been provided.
Okay, thanks. So I see that you answered Sean's other questions. Excellent. And I see Alicia asking how to become a stakeholder. I'm not clear, Alicia, on the question, but I'm not sure, Margot, if you're able to answer that.
I can make a guess if it means a stakeholder to take part in the development of the digital product passport. So as part of the ESPR, the Commission has set up an eco-design forum where stakeholders are represented and where the Commission basically inform them of the work and they can provide comments. I think to join is a bit close, but you can check which association is a member and whether you actually are a part of that association. There probably something. Otherwise, the Commission is doing a lot of information, and I'm sure you can just reach out to them. There are some public consultations from time to time on the acts that are being developed, so that's also a way of providing comments.
Okay, excellent. And Alicia says, okay, she accepts the response. Thank you. Is there any other question for Margot today?
And for maybe while there are other questions, just to chat on accuracy and reliability. Basically, the idea is that we're still in a system where it's like I'm not seeing a moment where we're gonna have companies verifying every single data point independently before they create their DPP. We're in a system where you create your DPP, you put the information on it, and then it's market surveillance authorities who, after the product has been put on the market, who do some surveillance and they identify cases where they think that it's non-conformity and they check it. So we're looking into ex post verification, I think most likely, in terms of enforcement.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that additional piece of information. While the others are thinking up their final questions, I'm going to invite everyone to put on their cameras because we want to do the group photo when we can have our presenter involved in the process as well. So I'm inviting you all, put on your cameras, put on that pretty smile. We have Margot here, but we know that Margot it's in the afternoon in her home country, and we are not going to hold her to staying through to the end of this presentation. So we are going to do our photo now. I'm going to invite Tiona, who will take the photo. And then when we come back, there's another question in the chat from Sean that we will invite Margot to answer for us.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. So there are 3 screens. So just ask you to hold your smile just for a bit as I go through all 3 screens. So first screen, you may not know who you are, but big smiles, everyone. 1, 2, 3. That's 1 screen down. Moving on to screen 2. 1, 1, 2, 3. Last but not least, screen 3. 1, 2, 3. Great, I have everyone.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So there's a final question in the chat, Margot. It's,
Yes.
let me see. Oh no, there's another one. There's a question from Hugh. He's asking about contact information to offer services to the DPP ecosystem. So who should he contact? And so we'd like to get that information. And then Sean is asking, will there be an option for competent authority bodies to warn on a national level against a product based on the information in the DPP?
All right. So the first one is a bit complicated to answer. The whole point of the DPP is that it's decentralized. So the infrastructure itself is being set up in standardization. The standards will soon be published. And so you can't really exactly offer services to them. But what you can do is become a DPP service provider. And I guess these DPP service provider will also receive services from other types of providers. And the Commission will set up certification scheme for service provider. Most likely, there's a delegated act on the rules for service providers. So if you're into the market of DPP, I invite you to have a look at this. On the second one, on competent authority and warnings. So I think this will be set up in the delegated act, but there are demands to have the DPP display, like if your product has been flagged for irregularity, that you have to display it on the DPP. This needs to be confirmed in legislation. We also expect national authorities to talk to one another, to share information about unconformed products. So yes, there are things that are being discussed on this, but I think they're not finally decided yet. So interesting to watch. See, there's yet another
Yes, there's another question. For those ERPs subject to also energy labeling, the QR code on the label can be used for DPP purposes and therefore DPP not to be developed for EL products, right? Okay, I'm just reading it verbatim. It
It's
needs
a
a little,
cryptic question, but I think I get it.
reversal, but okay, I think you get the question.
So, for context, uh, the current Eco Design Directive from like 20 years ago has its own centralized database that's called EPRL, where information on energy labeling is stored. And the Commission doesn't want to give up on it because they spent years developing it. And so there will be an overlap between the two for a few years. And so the products that are covered under the current energy labeling system will stay in April for the time being. Now, if they decide to create new rules for these products and that some of the information requirements are not included in April, they could be asked to create a DPP to save the new information and replicate the information from April. But this is in discussion at the moment because the idea that they have in mind is not yet really convincing everyone. So this is a moving target. If you're selling products that are under the energy labeling and you know that their rules for labeling are going to change in the next year, watch this. It's not entirely decided. But the
Thank you
idea is
for
that
that.
whatever, yes, the QR code and the labeling will link to the DPP. That's the idea.
Thank you so much for that. Chair, is there a word from you? I see you on the CROSQ chair, Mrs. Solange Baptiste.
Not at this moment.
Okay.
I'm listening keenly, and I think the questions that are asked would cover some of the concerns that were cropping up in my mind.
Okay, excellent. All right. So I would like you all to show some love as we thank Margot for her wonderfully engaging and insightful presentation. Thank you, Margot, and please take back our regards and love to your team members that we met, especially when we were in Brussels. Thank you so much for joining us today for your engaging presentation. And now we transition to our next speaker. She is a member of the Caribbean community and, in fact, the Technical Officer for Standards for the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, Miss Mara Abraham. Help me welcome Mara. Show
Good
some more
morning.
love. Yes, show some more
Good morning,
love.
everyone. Thank you very much,
Mara
Dr.
will be speaking
Walker.
to us on the Caribbean standardization process and DPP implications. Over to you, Mara.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Dr. Walker, and thank you, Margot, for your very insightful presentation. Okay, so we know that this is happening, and I guess we're going to speak about how it's going to impact us within the region. Just to make sure, are you seeing my screen? Yes, thank you. Okay, so in this presentation, I will introduce you to CROSQ, those of you who do not know. We will talk about how we develop standards as a region, how our member states look at adoption of regional and international standards, and how this DPP is going to change how we look at standardization. Okay, so first introduction for CROSQ. CROSQ was established in 2002. So we're not very old. We are established, we are an intergovernmental body within the CARICOM framework. We are governed by a standards council that is made up of the directors of the various national standards bodies within the region. We have several technical and special committees that we work with. That way we involve both the private and the public sector in the work that we do. We are located in Barbados, beautiful Barbados. For CROSQ's vision, which we just revised as of this year, is to be the global leader transforming lives through innovation, sustainable quality infrastructure. We will do this to transform lives by delivering fit for purpose within the quality infrastructure, which is standards, metrology, accreditation, conformity assessment, and provide solutions that will promote collaboration, enhance trust in trade, foster reliability, consistency, and help us within the region to improve our products and services. Our membership, we're made up of 15 of the 15 CARICOM member states. So we're looking at from Bahamas in the north, Belize in the east, in the west, all the way down to Suriname and Guyana on the South American plain. And we also have one associate member who joined us recently. So CROSQ, as I said, CROSQ works within the quality infrastructure. So we develop and harmonize standards across the region. We promote mutually recognized conformity assessment. So we assist in inspection, testing, and certification practices within the region. We promote the awareness of standards and standards-related matters, including the areas of the quality infrastructure, conformity assessment, and metrology. We facilitate work within our member states to facilitate the achievement of international competitiveness of goods and services. We also act as an organ within the CARICOM framework in which we provide assistance and facilitate discussions as it relates to technical barriers to trade at our highest level, which is quoted. And of course, we represent the region on a number of international and regional and hemispheric bodies where we deal with standards, conformity assessment, and metrology. So essentially, that is CROSQ in a nutshell. But how do we develop standards? Okay, within the region. I am the technical officer for standards, and within the quality infrastructure, there are other officers that deal with metrology, conformity assessment, and quality promotions within CROSQ. So I deal with basically with standards and how we go about developing standards within the region. So how do we do that? Standards are developed based on a request, okay? So within the region, a member state a stakeholder working with a member state through the NSB will submit what we call a new work item proposal. That is essentially saying that we need a new standard in a particular field, and this is the justification for it, and they will provide that through a member state. That is then submitted to the CROSQ Secretariat, and the CROSQ Secretariat will circulate that request to all our member states. The member states will then go to you, the private and public sector, and request an evaluation of that. Do we need that particular standard within our region? Will it facilitate trade for us? If the member states have agreed that this is required, then we will go through an approval process and we will start the development work through what we call a regional technical committee. So that committee is made up of stakeholders within a particular sector that the NWIP would be addressing, made up of public, private sector, academia, NGOs, importers, retailers within that particular sector. We will establish what we call a regional technical committee, and they will review the document. Now that committee will review the document. We will have a working draft, of course, because you have to start somewhere. So we'll have the working draft, and then the working draft will be reviewed by the technical committee until it reaches consensus. Now we realize that this is a small subsection of the member states. So that that committee draft is then circulated to all stakeholders through what we call the draft CARICOM Regional Standard. For you, the member states, or you, the stakeholders, to review that document, the draft document, and provide your input within the process. All your comments will be collated, and then the committee will then re-establish themselves and they will review all the comments. Those comments will then be determine whether or not they are included in the document, or they are, if they're not included, then they will provide you with some feedback as to why it's not included. And they will develop what we call the final draft based on all the comments that would have been received. That comment, that final draft, will then be submitted back to the member states. So you, the general public, who would have had an opportunity to provide comments, will then have that opportunity to see how your comments were addressed and indicate whether or not you are in agreement with the final draft. That final draft is then taken to our council for recommendation to COTED. Now, COTED is the Council of Trade and Economic Development Ministers, who then approves that document as a CARICOM regional standard. It is then published and it is made available to the stakeholders for use. It is also made available to the member states for adoption as national standards, which is how the standard itself become implemented within your member state. Of course, there is a maintenance system. So at the end of approximately 3 to 5 years, then we will facilitate what we call a review of the document, which will determine whether or not the standard is revised, amended, or withdrawn. Or if nothing is wrong with it, it is just reaffirmed. Okay, so this is essentially what the standards development process within the region looks like. Within our member states, there is the national system. Okay, and what we do is we urge all our members to adopt the regional standards. Okay, the regional adoption of those standards will help to facilitate trade. It will reduce duplication. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. A document already exists, and it is the member state a responsibility to now take that document and implement it within its member state. It is for harmonization of best practices. Okay. If something is already happening and it works well, it doesn't make sense to go and develop your own. You might as well just adopt, with a little tweaking, of course, occasionally, those best practices. And of course, it supports compliance to the World Trade Organization technical barriers to trade. So we do not want to implement technical barriers to trade as it relates to movement of products and goods and services across the islands. Within the member states, though, as we encourage the adoption of the regional standards, we also encourage adoption of international and some national standards. So some of our member states also adopt standards from organizations such as the ASTM International in the US, the British Standard Institute, and international organizations such as the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, the International Electro-Technical Commission, the IEC. For food standards, they look at the Codex Alimentarius Commission. Okay, so these are just a few other standards that member states can adopt to facilitate process exports as well, exports and imports, as well as production of goods and services. The process by which member states adopt regional or international standards is fairly similar to what I would have explained in terms of the regional process. It is established by the member state itself, and some of the considerations that they will look at would include things like national legislation, stakeholder needs, as well as their regional and international commitments. Okay, so then this process, as I said, is a little similar to what it is. So you would identify a need for a standard. A technical review is conducted. It is approved within the national framework, and then it is published using internationally recognized adoption methods. Okay, so let's get down to how does the DPP now affect how we within the region do standardization? Within CROSQ, we have what we call the Regional Standards Development Priority Plan. Okay, that plan, the RSDPP, is a document which guides the direction of regional standards development work over a 5-year period. That period currently is the 2022 to 2027. It manages how member states' expectations, and it provides a basis for efficient and effective resource utilization and mobilization. The document outlines several areas in which standards development should be a priority. Within the RSDPP, it did not, I don't think it envisioned the DPP, okay? But within that document, we are able to make adjustments, and as priorities occur, then we can make adjustments for that. So how some of the areas that it will change how we do standardization is that it's the expansion of standards into the digital product information. Traditionally, many of our regional standards focused on product quality, safety, performance, labeling, testing requirements. The DPP now introduces a new dimension, which is standardized digital information about the products. Within our RSDPP, we would have looked at digital transformation. So I guess we can say, although it did not envision the DPP directly, but the RSDPP looks at digital transformation. So the DPP would fall within that category. Okay, so some of the areas that we will now have to look at in terms of standardization would be product identification and unique identifier, machine readable product information. We look at the QR codes and how they are, and the digital carriers that would be required. So these are some of the areas that we would have to look at in terms of standards development. We now have to look at how we work with the various European standards. So we now have to look at how do we align some of our standards with the European international standards and ensure that we are actively involved in that process. Some of the areas that Margot would have mentioned earlier would have been sustainability, circular economy. These are some of the areas that our RSDPP would have covered, but I guess we will have to look at them more in depth as to how it is that we will use this information and develop standards within our hemisphere. Okay, so the emergence of new. So we will also have to look at the greater role of standards in digital trade. Yesterday at the session, we spoke a bit about customs and how we interface with customs. Even this morning, our custom procedures. Traditionally, trade facilitation would have been centered on our custom procedures and the product requirements, as well as conformity assessment. DPP now helps us to shift our attention to how is data interoperability, as well as for trade requirements. How do we now work with customs to ensure that we have the requirements built in within the standards? That way we can look at what is required out of the DPP. We know that customs have systems such as the Asecuda World system. So how do we integrate this systems within our digital platforms, and how do we work within those systems, and what are we going to be putting within our standards requirements to be able to work and ensure that we as a region can access these markets using this new system that there is. how do we work within the quality infrastructure? We now have to look at the various areas of the quality infrastructure within our standards development process. Quality infrastructure meaning standards, metrology, accreditation, certification, conformity assessment. Okay, so for example, currently when we develop standards, consideration is always given to conformity assessment. But then this consideration is primarily focused on product testing and certification. So with the introduction of the DPP, consideration for conformity assessment will involve more than just verifying the accuracy. It will now include verifying accuracy of the digital information. We just had a question on that. Who's going to be verifying the information and the traceability of that data that is being provided? So working within conformity assessment we will have to look at new areas to work with conformity assessment. It also means that we may have to look at new services and certification systems when we develop standards. Also, how do we measure and what do we measure? So we'll now have to work a lot more with metrology to ensure that we have the correct measurements as well as the accuracy of those measurements. And lastly, which is very important for us within the region, is participation. We now have to increase our participation in international standards development. Our CARICOM stakeholders need a greater involvement in international standards and the technical committees within those international bodies, especially those where we have the DPP being developed. We heard yesterday about the ISO IEC Joint Technical Committee, JTC5, which is developing the digital product passport. I actually checked that JTC, and within our hemisphere we have countries like Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Argentina, Brazil, and Colombia, and they are observers on that particular committee. There are no members of CARICOM in that committee. This is something that we need to start looking at. How do we get involved? We need to ensure that our member states have their voice heard on that committee. So we need to participate in that technical committee so that we are aware of what the requirements are and are able to implement as they are being developed. Another important thing is that CROSQ currently has an MOU with Sense and Elect. I think we probably, I bring Dr. Walker and I would probably have to discuss this. How do we implement that MOU to ensure that we are able to participate? Because one of the areas of cooperation is in the field of standardization. How will we be able to participate and how do we get involved in that process that is currently ongoing within that region, within the European region? Okay, so these are some of the areas essentially that we will have to look at in terms of how standardization happens within the region and how it will be affected. So the anticipated impact of the DPP on standardization within CARICOM is not simply the adoption of another set of technical requirements. Rather, it is likely to be a catalyst to transition from traditional product standards towards a more integrated system of digital sustainability and interoperability standards. This will shift CROSQ and the National Standards Body to expand their role from simply developing product specification to supporting digital infrastructure, data governance framework, and international standardization activities that will underpin the future of our global trade. So thank you very much for listening to us, and we are always available. Thank you.
All right, let's show Mara some love, guys. Let's show her some love. This is our Caribbean sister from your own Caribbean agency. So CROSQ is here to support, and I am so pleased that we now have 70 participants online. Great. Mara, thank you for your presentation. Very insightful presentation and deep. And we understand, we underscore everything that you have said. Now, I open the floor to our participants to ask any questions, and we will see how best we can answer the questions. Yes? So the floor is now open. How do you ensure, let me see, WTO compliance? Let me get this right. How do you ensure WTO compliance given that a number of standards are compulsory in CARICOM member states? Normally, legislation compulsory, standards voluntary to the extent. Let me try and see if I can rephrase it. So, all right, go ahead, Mara, go ahead. You're muted, Mara.
Yes, I just realized. But within the standards framework, we have what we call standards and technical regulations. Within our region, we consider technical regulations as compulsory standards. Within the member states, CROSQ in itself, we develop standards. The member states use those standards to develop technical regulations or compulsory standards. In terms of compliance, I don't think given that there's a number of standards that are compulsory, there are a number of standards that are compulsory. That is based on the member state's desire to protect its citizenry. When a standard is made a compulsory, then it requires different approaches as well as different reasons for making that standard compulsory. So whilst it is there essentially to protect, in terms of compliance, if a member state is going to make a standard compulsory, then it would have to consult the WTO. Sorry, not consult, but notify the WTO. Within that system, it allows for different member states within WTO to provide comments, and they can now adjust the standard. That way it does not become a technical barrier to trade based on the comments that they would have received. So I'm not sure exactly in terms of compliance, ensuring compliance, there is a mechanism that the standard does not become a barrier to trade within the systems that are established to make those standards compliant, compulsory. So I'm not sure if that is answering the question that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mara. I think I would add too, because if you're looking at WTO compliance and not necessarily focused on technical regulations and voluntary standards, there's an entire supporting system in the quality infrastructure. So as we discussed in terms of verification of some of the information that's included in the DPP, in terms of looking at your conformity assessment procedures and ensuring that you have the requisite internationally recognized conformity assessment bodies that will aid with the verification of information, not only the verification of the quality of the good or service. So the entire quality infrastructure in the CARICOM community will support both WTO compliance or European Commission compliance via their DPP. But as Mara said, standards and technical regulations are implemented by different member states depending on their needs. And so the respective countries and their stakeholders and their trading partners would align with those. And of course, I know the foreign trade ministries understand that if there's a technical regulation, it is going to be tested in the WTO system. So I think if your question has not been answered, Nekmetin, then you can type another one in the chat. But thank you so much, Mara, for answering. There's another question for you. How can a Caribbean country become a member of the Regional Technical Committee And I see, the other countries that are named there. I also wanted to, Mara, just to indicate that you noted that there were observers. I don't want us to be an observer. I want us to be a member to really contribute. So maybe you can answer that question and answer mine as well.
Well, I'll start with the last one first. Yes, they can be members. The member states can be members. The members that are members of ISO can be members on that committee. I guess those who, the members like DR and Cuba chose to be observers in the process. But our members can be, and I would advise that they become members within that GTC 5. In terms of Caribbean countries becoming members, it depends on the relationship between those countries. Currently, we do work with Dominican Republic, so we can have relationships with them. In terms of Cuba and Brazil, it all depends on the member states' relationship. I am not sure if you would be able to be a member of their committee, but you would probably be an observer or maybe a liaison within that committee. However, but then you can, it all depends on your NSB, how your NSB work with that, with that country, NSB. For a regional technical committee, though, any stakeholder within our region can become part of a regional technical committee. You just have to speak to your national standards body, and they can nominate you to be part of that regional standards committee. Okay.
Excellent. Final question in the chat. How are the digital informations used by the inspection bodies and consumers?
Well, right now, we're not implementing the DPP right now, but that is something that we will have to look at and what procedures and implementation methodologies that would be included within the inspection bodies. That is why I said in the presentation that we would need to look at what requirements we put in within our standards. It's going to change how we look at or how we do standardization and include requirements for the various products and services that we would have to now build in that information and how it will be used within the inspection bodies as well as for consumers.
And I see that a final question. How is the information from these past 2 days available? Yes, we have. And I'm going to ask Tiona at the end to share with you the fact that we will have a number of products that will be made available to all our participants and stakeholders. But as I wrap up, let me thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules and being here with us today over these past 2 days. I'd like to especially thank the chairperson of the CROSQ, Mrs. Solange Baptiste, who was here yesterday and today, and all the council members who are in the room. So we thank you for your participation. We want to say a very big thank you to all our presenters who presented over the last 2 days. We explored the emerging DPP regulatory framework, international developments and implementation timelines. We looked at data and standards requirements, implications for CARICOM trade and competitiveness. We looked at capacity building opportunities. And we thank all our presenters over the 2 days, 3 presenters yesterday or 2 presenters today. We want to recognize the European Commission. We want to recognize ETSI, Small Business Standards, Environmental Coalition and Standards, Caribbean Telecommunications Union. We want to recognize CROSQ through Mara and the entire CROSQ project team, all our participating stakeholders right across the CARICOM region for your valuable time, your contributions, and your support. The conversations during these 2 days underscores the importance of proactive regional collaboration as we prepare for the emerging digital trade requirements, we encourage you all, continue engaging with CROSQ. There are next steps in the process, and Tiona will share those with you. So thank you once more for your participation, your commitment, and partnership.